You think you know how to study. You have been doing it your whole life. Sitting down, opening a book, reading through the pages, maybe highlighting a few sentences, maybe rereading the chapter one more time before the test. And it works. Sort of. You pass. You move on. And then, a few weeks later, you remember almost nothing. Sound familiar? Here is the uncomfortable truth. The way most people study is almost completely wrong. Not a little wrong, not slightly inefficient, almost entirely wrong. And the worst part? You were never taught any different. Nobody sat you down in school and said, "Here is how the human brain actually learns." They just handed you a textbook and told you to get to work. But there is a man who spent decades studying how people learn. His name is Marty Lobdell, a psychology professor who taught at Pierce College for over 30 years. And he gave a lecture, one single lecture, that changed the way thousands of students approached studying forever. He called it "Study Less, Study Smart." And what he discovered flies in the face of almost everything we believe about learning. Let me show you what he found. Start with something you already know. You get tired. Not just physically tired, but mentally tired. You sit down to study, and after a while, your eyes are moving across the page, but nothing is going in. You read the same paragraph 3 times and retain nothing. You know this feeling. Everyone does. Most people respond to this by pushing through. Discipline, willpower. Just keep going. But that is exactly the wrong move. Because here is what is actually happening inside your brain when you feel that mental fatigue. Your brain is not a muscle you can simply push harder. It is more like a sponge that has a saturation point. Once it is full, adding more water does not make it wetter. It just runs off. Lobdell discovered something remarkable through his years of teaching. The average person can maintain genuine, high-quality focus for about 25 to 30 minutes. After that, retention drops off a cliff. You can spend another hour with your books open, but the actual learning happening in that time is minimal. You are burning time without burning information into memory. So the first secret is this: stop studying in long, unbroken sessions. Study in focused blocks of 25 to 30 minutes, then take a real break, 5 minutes, walk around, do something completely different, then come back. This sounds too simple to be revolutionary. It sounds like giving up. But it is the opposite. You are working with your brain's natural rhythm instead of against it. And here is what makes this so powerful. The quality of those 25 minutes, when you are fully engaged, is worth more than 2 hours of drifting, half-attentive reading. You are compressing effective learning into a smaller, denser window. You think you are doing less. You are actually doing more. People resist this because we have been trained to believe that hours spent equal learning achieved. If you studied for 4 hours, you must have learned a lot. If you only studied for 1 hour, you must not be serious. But time spent is not the same as learning. Learning is measured by what you remember, what you can retrieve, what you can actually use. And most people have never questioned the gap between those two things. Now here is where it gets interesting. When you take those breaks, you have to actually take them. This is not permission to scroll through your phone for 45 minutes. That is not rest. Rest means disengagement. It means letting your brain shift out of active processing mode. A real break is a short walk, a glass of water, a moment of just existing without a screen demanding your attention. Because here is what happens during genuine rest. Your brain keeps working, silently, in the background. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, the system that activates when you are not actively focused on a task. During rest, your brain consolidates what you just learned, makes connections, builds the neural architecture that turns short-term exposure into long-term memory. You are not wasting time resting. You are completing the learning you started. This is the same reason that sleeping after studying is so powerful. Sleep is not a passive state. It is an active biological process of memory consolidation. During slow-wave and REM sleep, your brain replays the information you encountered during the day, reinforces the connections between ideas, and clears away irrelevant noise. Students who sleep after a study session retain dramatically more than students who stay up cramming through the night. The all-nighter is not just inefficient, it is actively counterproductive. You are trading tomorrow's retention for tonight's false sense of productivity. But let us move to the second secret, because this one is almost universally ignored. Where you study matters more than you think. Most people study wherever is convenient: the couch, the bed, the kitchen table with the television on in the background, and then they wonder why they cannot focus. Lobdell was emphatic about this. You need a dedicated study space, not because it looks organized or because it feels responsible, because your brain builds associations. If you study in your bed, your brain will start to associate your bed with mental effort, making it harder to sleep there. If you study with the television on, your brain will begin to associate studying with passive distraction, making deep focus nearly impossible. The reverse is equally powerful. If you consistently study in the same place, and only study in that place, your brain begins to shift into focus mode the moment you sit down. You are conditioning an automatic response. The environment becomes a trigger. This is behavioral science at its most practical. Create a space that is only for studying. When you sit there, you study. When you are done, you leave. Over time, the ritual itself becomes part of the learning. Now here is the third secret, and this one is probably the most important of all. There is a fundamental difference between understanding something and memorizing something. And most students spend almost all of their time on memorization, when understanding is what actually matters. Lobdell called these two categories facts and concepts. Facts are isolated pieces of information that have no logical structure you can derive or reconstruct. The year a war began, a specific chemical formula, a vocabulary definition. These require drilling, flashcards, repetition, spaced practice. That is the right tool for facts. But concepts are entirely different. A concept has a logical structure, something you can understand at its core, not just recite on the surface. And if you truly understand a concept, you do not need to memorize it. You can reconstruct it from what you already know. You can derive it when you need it. You can apply it to situations you have never encountered before. That is the mark of real learning. Here is the test. Can you explain this thing you just studied in plain language? Not with the textbook definition. Not with the technical vocabulary you just read. In plain language, the way you would explain it to someone who has never heard of it before. If yes, you understand it. If you fumble, if you retreat to jargon, if you can only recite phrases without being able to say what they mean, then you have memorized a surface pattern without actually learning anything beneath it. This distinction fundamentally changes how you study. Instead of reading and highlighting and rereading, you should be asking questions. Why does this work this way? What would happen if this condition changed? How does this connect to what I already know? These questions force your brain into active construction. You are not receiving information. You are building it, piece by piece, into a structure that will actually hold. And that brings us directly to the fourth secret. Teach it. When you try to explain something you studied to someone else, every single gap in your knowledge becomes immediately visible. You get partway through an explanation and suddenly realize you do not actually know what comes next. You cannot fake it anymore. The illusion of understanding collapses instantly. So after a study session, close your notes and explain what you learned out loud. To yourself, to a roommate, to an imaginary person sitting across from you. Explain it without looking at your notes. See where you stop. See where your explanation loses clarity. Go back, fill that gap and try again. Repeat until you can walk someone through the whole idea smoothly, without hesitation, without falling back on memorized phrases. This is uncomfortable. Most students avoid it precisely because it reveals how little they actually understood. But that discomfort is the most important signal in learning. It tells you exactly where to focus next. The students who can teach are the students who have truly learned. The students who can only recite are one unfamiliar context away from knowing nothing at all. The test does not break you. It shows you where you were already broken before the test could. The fifth secret is about how you take notes, and it is going to challenge what most people were taught to do in school. Most students write down everything, every slide, every sentence, every date and definition. They create transcripts, not notes. And then they have pages and pages of material that is impossible to review efficiently. Here is the problem with that approach. Writing everything down is a passive act. Your hand is moving, but your brain is not deeply engaged. You are transcribing, not thinking. And transcription produces the illusion of learning without the substance of it. You feel productive. But feeling productive and being productive are not the same thing. Effective note-taking is selective and active. You listen, you process. You ask yourself what the key idea is. Then you write it in your own words, not copied, reconstructed. Because the act of translating what you hear into your own language is itself a powerful act of understanding. It forces you to process the information rather than just pass it through your hand. Review your notes within 24 hours of taking them. This is not optional. The psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus mapped what he called the forgetting curve, showing that we lose roughly 70% of new information within 24 hours of encountering it. 3/4 of your learning gone in a single day. But a brief review within that window, even 10 minutes, dramatically slows the forgetting. It is one of the highest leverage actions you can take in the entire learning process, which brings us to the sixth and final secret. And in some ways, it is the strangest one. Rewards work. Real, immediate, concrete rewards. After your 25-minute focused study session, give yourself something genuinely enjoyable. A snack, an episode of a show you like, a conversation with a friend. Something that actually feels good right now, and not in some abstract future. This sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but it is grounded in solid neuroscience. Your brain runs on a dopamine system. When you do something, and it is followed by a reward, your brain strengthens the pathway associated with that behavior. It marks that action as worth repeating. Over time, the action itself begins to trigger a small anticipatory response. The habit becomes self-reinforcing. Students who hate studying are often students who have associated studying with nothing but stress, confusion, and a distant promise of maybe being useful someday. That is an almost impossible motivational structure to sustain. No brain is designed to work hard for rewards that might arrive months in the future. But when you create an immediate positive association with the act of focused study, you are literally rewiring your motivational system. The experience slowly changes. It becomes not just something you do, but something your brain begins to expect and prepare for. Now, let me pull all of this together. Because the real insight is not in any single one of these secrets. It is in how they work as a system. Your brain is not a bucket you fill with information. It is a living, dynamic system with specific rhythms, specific needs, specific conditions under which it functions best. And for most of our lives, nobody taught us those conditions. We were handed textbooks and told to work hard. Hard work matters. But hard work aimed in the wrong direction is just exhaustion wearing the costume of effort. Think about where these habits come from. The idea that you should study for hours in a single session without stopping comes from a time before we had any real understanding of cognitive load, memory consolidation, or the default mode network. It is a tradition built on intuition and preserved by inertia. We inherited it from a pre-scientific era of how humans learn, and we continue practicing it generation after generation without ever asking whether it actually works. We now know better. We know about spaced repetition, the method of reviewing material at increasing intervals that dramatically slows forgetting. We know about retrieval practice, the technique of testing yourself on material instead of rereading it, which study after study has shown to be one of the most powerful learning methods available. We know about interleaving, the counterintuitive practice of mixing different subjects in a single session instead of focusing on just one, which feels harder but produces stronger long-term retention. We know all of this, and almost nobody uses it. Why? Because the techniques that feel like learning often produce very little. and the techniques that produce real learning often feel uncomfortable in the moment. Rereading is smooth and familiar. Testing yourself is difficult because you get things wrong. Studying in short bursts feels like you're quitting. Teaching out loud is embarrassing when you discover you cannot do it. But the feeling of learning and the reality of learning are almost entirely disconnected. The method that makes you feel smart in the moment and the method that actually makes you smarter are usually different things entirely. This is what makes Lobdell's work so significant. It is not motivational advice. It is a direct application of cognitive science to the practical problem of how humans learn and remember. Every piece of it is backed by decades of research. Every principle has been tested against the actual behavior of real students over and over again across different disciplines and age groups and educational contexts. The students who master these principles are not smarter than everyone else. They are not more naturally gifted or more disciplined. They are simply operating with a better understanding of how their brain actually works. And they are using that understanding instead of ignoring it. What does that look like in practice? Instead of sitting down for a 3-hour study marathon that leaves you exhausted and retains almost nothing, you study for 25 minutes with complete focus. Take a real 5-minute break, come back, and repeat. Instead of highlighting sentences and rereading chapters, you close the book and try to recall what you just read. Check yourself, and then go back specifically to what you got wrong. Instead of 5 pages of transcript notes, you write 1 page of reconstructed key ideas in your own language, reviewed the next morning for 10 minutes. Instead of studying in bed while half watching a show, you sit in a space dedicated only to focused work. Instead of memorizing definitions you do not really understand, you ask why until you can explain them plainly to someone else. And after every session, you give yourself something genuinely rewarding, something that makes the experience not just tolerable, but actually associated with good feeling. None of this is magic. None of it requires unusual intelligence or extraordinary willpower. But the effect of applying these principles consistently across weeks and months compounds in a way that is almost impossible to predict from the outside. Small inputs, executed with the right method, repeatedly over time, produce results that enormous, unsustainable bursts of effort simply cannot. Learning is not a passive act of exposure. It is an active act of construction. Every time you retrieve something from memory, you strengthen it. Every time you make a connection between 2 ideas, you deepen it. Every time you teach, you test the real integrity of what you know. Every time you rest properly, you let your brain complete the work you started. These are not philosophical ideas. They are biological facts about how memory is built and maintained. The speed at which you learn is not primarily